what are some things that you believe Carolina needs to do in order to improve for next season?
There's a few areas that I could look at with Carolina because Carolina, even though that they weren't that good when it came to their record overall, with how bad the NFC South was this past year, they actually had a potential to make the playoffs. They just fell a little bit short compared to the Bucks. So, with them being at a 7-10 record this past season, the NFC South is still kind of up in flux. So, if they make some small adjustments, it could actually have a positive outcome for the Panthers going into next year. So, one of the areas that I've looked at just initially is their wide receiving court. Their wide receiving court took a massive hit when DJ Moore was traded to the Bears. And when you look at DJ Moore this past season, he had around 65 catches, almost had 900 yards receiving, and he was by far and away their lead receiver this past season. But with him no longer in the fold for Carolina, when you look at their wide receiver core on paper right now, from first string down to third string for their starters, you have Terrace Marshall Jr., Shee Smith, and Chenault. So those three guys combined had a very similar output for production compared to DJ Moore. Because when you look at Chenault, Shee Smith, and Terrace Marshall Jr., they pretty much had somewhere in between about 20 to 35 catches, respectively, between each guy. So if they're going to run with those young guys at their wide receiving core and build them up to try to progress them to be better overall receivers, that is one avenue that they could take. But I also think that there's a possibility with them now holding that number one pick in the NFL draft, maybe they can trade down and get some more picks in return to where maybe they could look towards the draft to bring in another wide receiving core, maybe a higher end prospect in the wide receiver realm this draft to try to round out a better wide receiving core going into next year, because that is going to be something that we're going to focus on with Carolina. Just when you look at it on paper right now, it seems like their wide receiving core is a little bit thin, especially after DJ Moore just went to Chicago. And then the biggest one, if I had to say, is the quarterback. Because when you look at their starting quarterbacks right now, it's either a toss up between Sam Darnold or PJ Walker. And with the way that this draft is set up, if they were able to keep the number one pick, let's say they keep that number one pick hypothetically and they draft a quarterback, it could go after Stroud, they could go after Richardson. Is that going to be the guy that's going to potentially lead this franchise to future success? It's all really depending on whether or not that they trade down with that pick. Hypothetically, they could use that number one pick to secure their quarterback of the future in this draft potentially. But with the reports circulating right now, it seems like it's more likely than not that they're going to trade out of that pick to acquire more picks. And maybe they could look towards drafting a quarterback in the second or third round, potentially. It kind of depends on how they want to look at it. But as far as I see it, the quarterback position is a key area of need, simply just because it's really been a hit or miss spot with the personnel that they've had in that quarterback room since Cam Newton. So overall, for what I see it as, just two issues that the Carolina Panthers need to address this offseason. It's definitely the quarterback spot, because if you don't have a quarterback, the offense isn't going anywhere. And then number two would probably be their wide receiving core. So I know Kev probably has some other things that the Panthers could focus on this offseason. So I will kick this one to him from here on out.
So obviously that leaves me with one addition that they're going to need to make, and that is going to be specifically a defensive playmaker, whether that's a corner, a safety, a linebacker. Someone's going to have to be put out there in order to make some defensive stops, or at least, like I said, a specific playmaker to go out there and make big plays on that side. If I'm not mistaken, if I'm reading this correctly, statistically, the Panthers were 26th in the NFL in the turnover margin. They averaged one turnover per game. They were -4 overall in the margin. They gave the ball away 21 times, and they only had 17 total takeaways. So when you talk about defense and obviously drafting a young quarterback for the offense, you're going to need someone to go out there and get stops, whether that's, again, that's a big pass rusher, a linebacker, somebody to go out there, a shutdown corner. The Panthers are in desperation mode. They weren't the worst defense overall statistically, but when you talk about not being able to create and force turnovers as a team, that's not something that you are going to be able to live and die with moving forward in the NFL. So to kind of just like I said, to smallly add to Kyle, that's definitely going to be a defensive playmaker, someone that's going to go out there and get you some stops.